All right, hello everybody. We're so glad that you could join us for our second Bird Friendly Friday today on building a sanctuary for birds. My name is Emily Connor. I'm an educator at the Audubon Center at Riverlands, and we would like to welcome everybody tuning in from the St. Louis region and beyond. Now, as we adapt to a more virtual world today, we hope that these bird-friendly Fridays will start to spark some fun and meaningful ideas on how you guys can help birds at home. So today, I'd like to introduce Mitch Leachman, who has been active with the Audubon Network for about 25 years. He is currently the Director of Programs and the Coordinator of Bring Conservation Home Program for St. Louis Audubon Society. So today, Mitch will be discussing how to build a sanctuary for birds at home. So I'm going to turn it over to Mitch.
Thanks, Emily. Really appreciate the opportunity to participate in your Bird Friendly Friday series. Before we get into the subject matter here, first, just by way of explanation, we will be just scratching the surface of this subject today. We could spend an entire class series talking about all the different ways in which you could help birds in your own landscape. Consider this an introduction. We'll provide some specific ideas. I have a number of slides later in the talk that provide very particular lists of suggestions that you might consider. Also at the end, we'll have a collection of resources that you might investigate further to explore this on your own. Also, we should have plenty of time at the end, if you take advantage of the Facebook Live chat, to respond to your questions. Before I go much further, I do want to recognize the three logos that we have on the title slide. The St. Louis Audubon Society, which you've already referred to and heard about. I work for that organization. They are a local chapter of National Audubon here in the St. Louis region. The Bring Conservation Home program also has been mentioned. That is a wholly owned program of St. Louis Audubon, and that program underpins everything that we're talking about today. It's also one of the resources that I'll be talking briefly about later. And lastly, the Triangle of the Missouri Department of Conservation. We do like to highlight them as often as we can, since they're such a critical partner for basically all the environmental organizations here in the St. Louis region. And we do have a specific cooperative agreement with the department for our Bring Conservation Home program. They provide essential support to it. So getting into things here, let's start with, what does a bird sanctuary look like? So we just came out of winter. Well, here in St. Louis, we just came out of winter. Some of you listening in or watching this later might still be in the throes of winter. Fortunately, I think we're done with snow here in the St. Louis area. But this looks pretty plain. Hard to imagine there's much going on in this landscape that would support birds. A different view, still in winter, close-in look at a specific bed. Again, pretty obvious, rather logical to think that there's really not much going on there, probably not really for any wildlife, let alone just birds. Different landscape, also still in winter. Now we're looking at a whole bunch of plants, things other than grass, although there is grass still in this photo, buried underneath the snow. We got a tree, we've got some shrubs, we've got a bunch of grasses and last year's flowers and things. Another landscape, still in winter, and wow, now we're looking at a whole bunch of shrubs, varieties of woody plants versus flowering plants, and yet, again, still grass. We have the snow there in the middle. We do still have grass in the landscape. So switching to summer, and speaking of grass, so again, question, what does a bird sanctuary look like? Hard to imagine a whole lot going on here. We do have shrubs around this house. They look like they're all imported shrubs, very tight boxwoods and things that really actually have a hard time providing a lot of support for birds, unfortunately. And again, in contrast, so here's a very nice landscape that's definitely got some value for birds. Again, we've got a mix of flowers, some shrubs, some trees, and still we've got plenty of space to enjoy the landscape and to utilize it as us humans as well. So let's consider why we have this tremendous disparity. It's not really a surprise, it really shouldn't be, that in so many of our landscapes, there's just not a lot of support for birds and other wildlife. In this right here, bird feeders, which I have in my landscape, to be fair, but they no longer are the only thing that I provide for wildlife or for birds. But we've been given the impression for arguably generations that bird feeding is all you need to do. Get your woodpeckers with your suet feeder, get your finches and your sparrows and your cardinals with the seed feeders, get your hummingbird feeders out because here come the hummingbirds from the Gulf Coast. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with doing the bird feeders, but the birds need so much more. The birds need fruit. They need fruit throughout the seasons, from summer all the way through winter. This, by the way, is a cedar waxwing on a native serviceberry tree. Very pretty bird. Also serviceberry, same plant, and this is a juvenile robin. So this is summer fruit. So one of the many plants that can provide fruit for birds in the summer months. Birds need seeds. No surprise that the bird feeding industry exists because somebody literally was observing what birds were doing anyways and managed to make a multi-gazillion dollar industry out of bird feeding, and yet the birds are going to eat the seeds of the plants should they be available in the landscape because that's what they're used to doing. It's a goldfinch. It's a goldfinch eating seeds of a coreopsis. The seeds for some birds, like goldfinches, are essential in many different seasons, but especially in the fall and winter months. The birds, again, are really going to be leaning on finding seeds, finding fruit. Here's a white-throated sparrow perched on some New England aster during a snowstorm. And back to the goldfinches, because who can get enough of the American goldfinch? And this is a male eating the seeds of a cup plant in our backyard just last year. So fruit and seeds and insects. Birds need insects. Look, cardinals eating caterpillars, chickadees eating caterpillars, and yes, even hummingbirds eating insects. Who would have thought, right? So what we want to emphasize in this, again, brief introduction is using native plants, the plants that evolved in our region, the plants that exist in the wild, quote unquote, the wild, in our parks, our conservation areas, and finding opportunities to introduce those native plants in layers in your own home landscape. This is a home landscape, and we've got small trees. We got redbud here on the left. We've got a small pond that the owner created with plants in there. We got shrubs in the background. We've got big trees in the background. Different landscape, also with native plants, and yet also plenty of open grassy space for the landowner, because that's what they wanted as well. They wanted their native plants, they wanted their birds, they wanted their nature sanctuary, but they also wanted a neat and organized yard, and they have both. They have both. It doesn't need to be an either or proposition. So we are talking about building habitat. That's our technical term for today, right? So habitat is basically providing to birds and other wildlife what they need to exist, providing them a natural environment, providing them the physical pieces of what they would take advantage of on their own, left their own devices in a natural setting. And this is another very, very nice suburban space with a layered landscape. So habitat. There are 4 elements of habitat. We are not going to talk about all 4 of these today. Again, this is an introduction. We're going to spend most of our time talking about food. So the elements of habitat being food, water, shelter, and places to raise their young. So I'll just say right now, because I might not remember to say it later, one of the reasons we're not going to spend any time talking about the 3rd and 4th shelter and places to raise your young is because, in fact, talking about the food and talking about the native plants that one would use to provide the food, you're actually creating and sort of automatically providing the same materials that would then also support both the nesting opportunities, the roosting opportunities. And for a full functioning sanctuary, we really do need all 4 of these elements. So native plants I've referred to several times already. Most of the rest of our time today in this introduction will be talking about native plants, highlighting some specific native plants, and we have to use those types of plants to make this happen. So why do we need native plants? So we need native plants because we have to support the insects. Already said, insects are an essential part of bird diets. In fact, they're essential to the reproduction of all of our songbirds in the lower Midwest. All of our songbirds looking for insects to feed their young, because that's what it's all about. When you're a bird, your imperative when it comes to reproduction is mating. In the case of birds, laying eggs, those eggs hatching, and then you need to feed those babies for them to mature and then mate and then continue the whole process again. For the average songbird, for the cardinal, the chickadee, the sparrow, for the average songbird that we're familiar with in the average suburban yard, those babies need protein. They need protein just like human babies need. You can't build muscle and bone without protein. But when you're a small songbird, where's the best way to get protein? It turns out it's insects. If we keep emphasizing songbirds, because if I was a different type of bird, if I was a carnivore, if I was a hawk, an eagle, or an owl, well, insects are not that important to me because I'm going to get my protein for my babies by eating other animals, in some cases even eating other birds. So the key point here is the critical, essential value that insects have as a perfect little protein package for these songbirds to feed their babies. We talk about caterpillars a lot when it comes to this native plant connection, not because they're the only insects that the birds eat, but because they are so readily available. There are so many different kinds of caterpillars out there. These, of course, when we say caterpillars, generally speaking, we're talking about the larva stage of butterflies and moths. We've got some 11,000 different species of them in North America. And the other thing I like to highlight when it comes to caterpillars versus other types of insects is if I'm a bird, which do you think would be easier to pursue and to feed your babies? A caterpillar, which is slow moving, can't fly away, might try to camouflage itself. And this would be in contrast to like a beetle, a flying beetle, which I may have to catch. I might have to expend energy to catch it. And then once I get it, I probably have to disassemble it in order to feed it to my baby because of that hard exoskeleton. So caterpillars are a really, really big, important part of the diet of our songbirds. So just to emphasize the points, and I had a photo earlier with a chickadee eating caterpillars. So yes, they feed their young insects. They feed them caterpillars as well. How many caterpillars does it take to make a family of chickadees? Well, a study that was done a number of years ago some very poor, unfortunate grad students working for a university professor. They had the pleasure of watching, observing, and counting the caterpillars that were brought in and fed to the babies in over just a 2-week period of time, average feeding period for our small songbirds, roughly 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars for that one family of chickadees. Just again, a clear example, a clear emphasis of the critical importance of these insects for the reproduction of the birds. So we promised it's about native plants, and it's about native plants because, in fact, if you are an insect like a caterpillar that is eating a plant, and that's what you do, that's where you get your sustenance, you eat a plant, odds are really good that you have specialized, that over an evolutionary timescale, you have figured out how to get past the chemical defenses of a very small array of plants. This is not surprising that plants would have chemicals in their tissues, because again, if you logically think it through, well, everything that gets eaten has to be able to escape, because if everything that was prey couldn't escape, if all of it was eaten, it just wouldn't be there to be consumed the following season, the following growing cycle. So some things always have to escape a predator-prey relationship. They have to escape to reproduce. If I'm a rabbit, I can hop away. I can be active at a certain time of the day. If I'm an insect, I can fly away. If I'm a bird, I can fly away. But a plant can't escape, right? Plants don't move. So plants have chemical defenses in their tissues, and that is their single primary way to defend themselves against being eaten. And that leads to specialization. That leads to only a few array of critters can eat different types of plants. And this, therefore, leads us back to native plants. The native plants are the plants that were here in North America, evolved in the natural systems that we have, and they have an insect diversity that has evolved with them. And we, unfortunately, in most of our suburban spaces, have displaced those native plants. We've cleared out what was here. We've brought in ornamental plants, and there's really no insects here that eat those ornamental plants. So if you want birds, you want a nature sanctuary, you want other wildlife, you really need to restore the native plants to support those native insects that are already here. So one of about 5 slides that I have that I'll pause for a moment. I'll talk a little bit about. You might be making notes, you might be taking a screenshot. Certainly this will be posted as a video later, so you could, of course, simply pause it and take a look at it. But this is a summary of data that shows the critical importance of those native plants versus the non-native plants. So you see common native plants on the left, common non-native plants on the right, and the numbers represent how many different species of butterfly and moth caterpillars have been seen feeding on each type of plant. So you're going to recognize a lot of these plants, and very quickly you see these big, large numbers and go, well, if insects are really important to birds, and clearly I need the native plants to support those insects based on these numbers. You may really like your hostas, you may really like your zinnias or your boxwoods, but just understand that if you have them, you're not going to get a bird sanctuary out of them. And that's not to say get rid of all of them. That's to say, look for a spot, find a place, add the natives, create a pollinator garden with natives, create a shrub corner with native shrubs. If you want boxwoods at the front of the house, keep your boxwoods at the front of the house, and then look for another place for the native shrubs. This is the same sort of information. This is just zooming in a little bit more detailed. These are only native plants. And again, just showing the critical importance of these plants to support the diversity of the insect life that the birds need. So it isn't just woody plants, although woody plants like our oak trees and our hickories and our maples are really, they're doing the foundational work of supporting most of these insects, but you have some extremely valuable native plants, even in the flower category and the herbaceous category, that support a tremendous array of plant-eating insects. So, not surprising, what we're emphasizing is plants that have holes in their leaves where insects have been eating those plants. That's a good thing. The traditional landscape on your left is just not going to support the system, the process, the food web that we need to support that wildlife sanctuary. So, circling back to the subjects we pointed out earlier of the insects, the fruit, the seeds, right? So just spent a bunch of time talking about the critical importance of insects, showed you a couple of slides with some plants listed. So we want to drill back into fruit. So what types of plants? You saw this one earlier, a different photo, but same bird in the same tree. So this is downy serviceberry here in the St. Louis region with a cedar waxwing. This is a gray catbird in an American beautyberry shrub, also here in the St. Louis region. And here, and again, I'll pause for a moment. This is a good list of native plants that can provide fruit in a bird or wildlife sanctuary across the seasons. You see this broken out by summer, fall, and winter. So again, birds are looking for fruit at many different seasons, and these plants are organized based on when their fruit typically ripens and is most readily available for those birds. This is obviously not all of the native plants that provide fruit, but it's a good selection. Some adaptable plants. There's small plants on here. There's large trees on here. Different types of plants that would serve in different areas of your landscape. So we've already mentioned about seeds, right? So again, so we're just walking through and then talking about some specific examples. So again, we saw this graphic earlier, bird seed feeding. If you want to do this, you continue to do this. Even if you're doing native plants, that's fine. Again, I have both. I have some 80 different species of native plants in our small suburban landscape and still put out bird feed. And that's just because I have a very reliable spot for the birds to show up. But again, the birds are adapted and they're accustomed to finding seeds in the landscape where they would have ordinarily. So goldfinch on a gray head coneflower. We love the goldfinches. Clearly, hopefully, obviously, you need to leave the spent flowers out for this to work, right? You can't be deadheading and just cutting all your plants back as soon as they're done or as soon as you get to fall and actually provide this value to the birds. And, you know, at least in some areas of your landscape, you're going to want to consider the opportunity of leaving the seed heads up there. So same thing, just like with fruit, this is not all of the native plants that are going to provide seed for the birds, but it's a good representative sampling of them. Again, different types of plants, from flowers to woody plants to grasses, and enough different types of plants to serve many different opportunities within an average suburban landscape. So again, hopefully we've driven the point home that we really, really need the native plants to make this happen. Native plants are pretty in their own right as well, and you can garden with them just like you would garden with any non-native ornamental plants. So my last comment here with a few slides before we close out with some resources is maintenance. So again, here in St. Louis, spring arrived early. We got warm a number of weeks ago. All the plants just started pushing out. Again, depending upon where you're at, you may still have some snow, but you'll be looking at spring. We're continuing to push through spring here in the St. Louis area. So a couple of key points about spring maintenance when it comes to native plants in your wildlife sanctuary. What do you need to do? Do you need to do any special things with native plants? Well, here's a garden bed in the center of our front yard, surrounded by turf grass that's mowed and maintained. And this happens to be an aster, a native aster. And this is from this week, photo taken this week, and you're looking at last year's flowers. We haven't cut them off. The birds were eating the seeds over the winter, and you can see the plant pushing up this year's growth right at the base of it. And I'll zoom in. This is the same plant. I'm looking at the base of it. We've done nothing to this plant. We've done no cutback, no maintenance, no removal of anything, and the plant doesn't care. The plant doesn't need to be cut back. Now, we will, within the next few weeks, we will cut those seed heads back off just for appearance purposes. But the plant doesn't need the maintenance that we're used to. This is the same garden bed. This is a different plant. This is called Texas Green Eyes. And this garden bed is filled with leaf litter, filled with a leaf blanket, sorry. We're trying to get appropriate labels for these things to give folks the appreciation, the value. Leaves have a real important value in an ecosystem. All sorts of important critters, including many of the insects. Many of those insects that the birds are looking for during the reproduction cycle, many of those insects are going to overwinter in the leaf blanket. They're going to overwinter as eggs or as larvae or as pupa. And if we pull all those leaves out at any time of the year, we're taking all of that value away, all of that wildlife value, all of those food sources. So this Texas Green Eyes, again, it doesn't need the leaves to be cleared. It's coming out without a problem. And here's last example. This is a mixed bed. Primarily what's in the middle of this photo is called Culver's root. To the right, you'll see a few sprouts of New England aster. And all around, you see a whole bunch of leaves from last year. You also see plant stems from the previous years, where we've cut the plants back a little bit and then just left the stems in the garden bed. Again, the plants don't need any special cleanup. They're doing just fine. So resources. We'll close out here on resources and then should be able to take some questions if you have them. So for those of you that are not, well, actually, no matter where you're at, here's two really, really cool resources. National Audubon has a program called Plants for Birds, and the National Wildlife Federation has a native plant finder, and they've been encouraging at home in small wildlife sanctuaries for some 30, 35 years. Both of these organizations have neat little tools online. You can put in your zip code and you can work through their database and you can find specific plant recommendations for your area. More regionally here in the St. Louis metropolitan area, we have a number of amazing resources. And again, the Bring Conservation Home program, which we've mentioned a couple times. I'll close with that here in just a minute or two, but just a quick shout out to these other three entities, the Missouri Department of Conservation, the triangle logo there I've already referred to. They have an amazing array of resources for landowners, free resources, online resources, downloadable resources, print publications you can order or request for free. Wild Ones is here in the St. Louis area, the St. Louis chapter. We actually have two chapters. We have one in St. Charles County as well. They are regional garden clubs for native plant people. I will let you look them up online, but I think that is a very apt description of what they do and the services they provide. It's an amazing resource for anybody that's interested in doing this sort of stuff. And then Grow Native is a regional nonprofit, the regional program of the Missouri Prairie Foundation, and they cover the lower Midwest, and they have tremendous resources on their website, including a native plant database. So our Bring Conservation Home program in the last minute or two here is also known as Habitat House Calls. So for a small fee, now I'm telling you what the program is, and this is pre-pandemic. This is pre-COVID-19. So we are actually actively working out a new protocol for our service that still provides you everything I'm about to say, but we don't interact with you personally in your landscape. So again, the photo you see obviously doesn't include social distancing, but this is how we operated. It is a service in which we learn about your landscape, your specific landscape. We are likely going to be doing this through photos and possibly video calls. So we'll get the particulars of your landscape, and then at least two of us, trained, experienced native plant folks, will provide you detailed written recommendations on how to improve your landscape for birds or other wildlife based on your goals and your interests. So the program's been around since 2012, and we've visited with over 1,200 landowners, and we have about 250 that have received certification in our program. And this is just a small sampling of some of those happy landowners that have done some really amazing, cool stuff in their landscape for birds and other wildlife with native plants. Oh, okay. So sorry about the out of order photos there. This is my last slide, and then I'll take it off screen share, and we'll take questions if we have them. You have my contact information on this slide. Again, if you're in the greater St. Louis metropolitan area, the Bird Conservation Home Program is available to you. If you're outside of our region, I would especially encourage you to look to those two websites for Audubon and National Wildlife Federation. The key is, again, you don't need a large space. Almost anybody can do this. Native plants are required, and it is called gardening. So with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we'll see if there are any photos, see if there are any questions. Waiting for my partners to tell me if there are any questions.
Hi, Mitch. This is Michelle from the Audubon Center at Riverlands.
Hello.
So I am so excited. I love the presentation. I actually went through the Bring Conservation Home Program, as you know, a couple years ago, and it's been hugely beneficial to us. So if you are listening now, I really, really recommend you reach out to Mitch and St. Louis Audubon Society, because it's really been transformative for us at our house as we try to, make a difference in our backyard. So we do have some questions coming in. So Mitch, it looks like our first question for you is, someone's asked, I want to plant for birds, bees, and butterflies in my garden. What are the top 5 must-haves that is a good sustainer for them?
Yeah, so a very common request, very common interest. It's not that simple. So the reason it's not that simple is the answer is going to be dependent a lot on what your site conditions are. Is the space that you're looking at sunny? Is the space all shade? Is it moist or is it dry? Do you want big plants? Do you want woody plants, shrubs or small trees? Do you want a flower garden? And even within a flower garden, some people want neat and orderly gardens, right? Small plants, well-behaved plants. And some people would have a more desire and maybe more of a wild and natural sort of look with larger plants and plants that might be more aggressive. I mean, not only to give you just a list of 5 for, say, like the 5 best plants for birds, but you're asking for birds, butterflies, and bees. So it's a big, giant ask there, and it really comes down to parsing out the rest of the story for you. What's the location? What are some of your interests?
Sounds good. So if you're in the St. Louis region, reach out, and I'm sure that they would be able to give you some more information through that Bring Conservation Home Program too.
And as you're looking there, Michelle, let me mention one other thing that the question inspires me to say, and I didn't highlight it on the resource slides, but it's a really good tool, and it's available to anybody. It's not just a regional tool here in the St. Louis area. But if you go to mobot.org and you look for Plant Finder, the Plant Finder through the Missouri Botanical Garden is an amazing resource. It is not just native plants, which is fine, but it does include a huge array of commercially available native plants and has a very detailed search function. So not only could you check that you want it to show you only native plants, you can do that, but you could also check, I want tall plants. I want short plants. I want sun. I want shade. I want woody. I want flowers. So it's all sorts of different switches in the detailed search function that will really help the person along that path.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. So it looks like we have another question for you. Someone wanted to know, do you recommend leaving the leaf blanket entirely, like all year round, or would you say that they could remove the leaf blanket, say in summertime?
Yeah, so that largely comes down to your own aesthetics, your own preferences for what you want the space to look like. So in other words, we try not to talk about backyard habitat. We try not to talk about backyard gardening, just because we want people to understand that you can work on your nature sanctuary in any part of your yard. Mm-hmm. But you might want certain areas of your yard to be neater than others. You may have a broader tolerance for what the bed looks like, depending upon where it's located. And that does apply to us. The photo I showed you that had the aster that I said hadn't been cut back yet, and I did note it will be cut back a little later this spring, because that bed is in the front yard, and we do want the front yard to be a little bit neater. Now, in that same bed, though, to the question, I won't be removing any leaf any of the leaves, any of the leaf blanket in those beds, because the plants are showing me they don't need it to be removed. They're going to push right up through the leaves, and they'll be just fine. Again, in nature, always ask yourself, what would nature do? Nobody leaf blows the woods, right? Nobody comes along and does a haircut to all of the plants on the prairie, or all of the shrubs on the edge of the woodland. So nature doesn't need any of that, but reflect in your own situation and what you're looking for in your own landscape.
Awesome. So we had another question from Eric, and he is wanting to know, is there a way that we could organize a garden club so that we could share plants? Or maybe you know of a native plant exchange program locally, Mitch?
In the St. Louis area, we have a number of opportunities, but the two best, I think the best would be the St. Louis Native Plant Swap Facebook group. It was started a few years ago by Bessa. As a matter of fact, just this past week, I was posting to it because I dug up some of my plants that I have too many of, and there's some pots out on the carport right now waiting to be picked up. So St. Louis Native Plant Swap is a Facebook group in the St. Louis area. Also in our area, the Wild Ones folks, which I also mentioned as a local resource, they're, again, I'm not sure what it's going to look like with the concerns over the coronavirus, because they would have monthly meetings, monthly get-togethers during the bulk of the growing season. And those were always an opportunity to share seeds or plants in person. But I would watch their Facebook page. They have a blog, and I'm confident they're facilitating these sorts of things, doing it remotely.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask you a little bit, Mitch. So as you started this in your own yard, did you have any birds that you hadn't got attracted to your yard yet, and you maybe planted some things specifically for a type of bird that you wanted to attract? And if so, how did it work?
Very good question. And for me, that's primarily about hummingbirds. I mentioned that I do put out feeders in addition to all my native plants. I have seed feeders and I have a soot feeder, but I've never done a hummingbird feeder because I am lazy, because I am not interested in cleaning hummingbird feeders 2-3 times a week during the middle of the summer. But I love hummingbirds. So I have target planted a number of things in the yard specifically to provide nectar through flowers for hummingbirds. And my biggest success and my happiest of plants and the plant that gives me the most joy is the native coral honeysuckle vine, Lonicera sempervirens. I put a trellis up, so when one gardens with vines, one should garden with structures. You should consider a trellis, a pergola, an arbor, something for that vine to grow on, a fence that is yours. If you want to grow a vine and you have a chain link fence that you share with your neighbor, unless you really know the neighbor, it's not necessarily neighborly to plant your vine and let it grow on that fence, that shared fence. But I have a trellis that we put next to the garage, and the coral honeysuckle has been growing for a few years. Matter of fact, right now I'm looking at it through the patio door, and it is filled with flowers that are just waiting for probably 2 more days of really nice temperatures, and they'll start opening up, which is perfect timing because hummingbirds are arriving here in the St. Louis area. And that plant, that particular native plant, will have flowers on it from April to October. That's really, really cool.
That's awesome. And then another question I wanted to ask is are there like any plants that you would recommend, either native or non-native, that we avoid or could be harmful to birds?
Native plants to avoid?
Either one. If there is a native plant that you think we should avoid, let me know. But I also just wanted to know overall.
Okay, plants in general, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the best answer to that, since I clarified there, as I hopefully made very clear, if you have some non-native plants, or if you simply like, plants that you grew up with, or plants with your neighbors or whatever that happen to be non-native, that's fine. Just, the point is that they're not structural fundamental parts of habitat or wildlife sanctuary. And so find an opportunity to add the natives. That said, there are a number, fortunately not hundreds. I mean, here, for example, in the Missouri area, there are over 1,000 introduced plants. Okay, so plants that were brought in from another country or continent. In our program, we look for non-native invasive plants, like bush honeysuckle, like winter creeper. We look for non-native invasive plants in landscapes and try to encourage landowners to eliminate them, to address them, to keep them from reproducing. And we have on our list less than 30 species of non-native invasive plants. So it is a small fraction of introduced plants that are problems, that are invasive. Those small fraction of plants, of course, do a lot of damage, and they're very aggressive and spread across the region. That would be my primary advice, or my primary response is just, when in doubt, seek out expert resources, seek out the state agencies, the universities, the nonprofits like the Missouri Botanical Garden, and look for their list, look for their references for these non-native invasives, and ensure that either you're not adding them, or if you can, you're actually trying to reduce and minimize them.
Great, thank you. So I don't see any more questions coming in on our chat right now. So I think what we'll do is, if we can go back to the screen share, and I think Emily's gonna join us again. Thank you, Mitch.
You're welcome. Just a moment. There we go.
All right, thanks, Mitch. So thanks to everybody for tuning in for this, our second Bird Friendly Friday. Hopefully you all are getting some good ideas on some native plants that you could integrate into your habitat, hopefully attract some more birds, especially right now during spring migration. So we wanted to let you guys know to be sure to tune in next week, next Friday at 2 p.m. for our next Bird Friendly Friday. Now, our next presentation will be on birds and lights. So we have a lot of local experts from all the National Audubon Society, from St. Louis Audubon Society, and the Missouri chapter International Dark Sky Association. So they're going to primarily be talking about the effects that light pollution have on birds and things that we could do to help. So be sure to tune in next Friday at 2 p.m. We'll be back on Facebook Live, so the same way that you got to this video today, and we look forward to seeing you there.